Hey everybody, welcome back to Around the Emirates podcast with Sara Mousa, where I speak to guests from across UAE about topics you want to hear about. Today I'm joined by Pierre Carnet, who is Managing Director of MassiveMusic MENA, which is the Middle East's leading sonic identity and music brand agency. Hello, Pierre.
Hello, Sarah. How's it going?
It is going fantastic, and I'm so excited to interview you. I love talking to people in the music industry. I'm so curious to hear all about your part in this. Please tell me your story and how you got into this sector.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on. It's a nice opportunity to get to speak about something maybe which is a little bit different and which people may not have heard about so much. So maybe I can just start off with a quick introduction about kind of what we do as a business, and then I can talk about me for a minute, but just to sort of lay the ground because we do work in quite a specific niche, and what I hear a lot is people who will, when I explain kind of my job to them, who will say things like, well, I had no idea that that kind of job actually exists. So basically what we do at Massive Music is the world's leading music agency for brands. And so the space that we operate in is everything that has to do with creating, curating, finding and using music and sound for the world of brands. So this includes things like creating music for advertising, or for example, if a brand wants to use a famous song in a commercial, we take care of that. But also kind of all of these more niche and specific things that you can imagine in the space of music and sound for brands. So we do a lot of work in the audio branding space. Think of things like audio logos, jingles, brand anthems, but also looking kind of the interactive space of music and sound for brands. So for example, the sounds that you have in your apps, your notification sounds or device sounds. What sound does an electric car make when you turn it on? All the way down to things like artist partnerships, events. We've even created a voice assistant in the past for Samsung phones. So this is the niche that we operate in. So basically we sit at the intersection of the music industry. We work with labels, with composers, with artists, with sound engineers, and so on, and the sort of more corporate and marketing brand world where we work with big brands all around the world. We work with creative advertising agencies, production companies, and so on. We also do a little bit of work in the space of music and sound for television and for film, which maybe I can talk a little bit about later. In terms of me and who I am, my name is Pierre, or you gave a very solid pronunciation there, Pierre. I am French originally. I've been in the UAE for not that long, I guess, by local standards, about a year and a half at this point. And though I'm originally from France, I'm a term that kind of people use to describe me is I'm a bit of a third culture kid. I've grown up sort of all over the place and lived in various places since I was a child. As a child and a teenager, I lived in France, in England, in Germany, in Singapore, in China for a while. And during my later years as a student and kind of beginning of my career, I lived in the US and Canada, in the Netherlands more recently. So quite a kind of an international person. And I've always been very passionate about music. I've been producing and making my own music since I was about 14 years old. Before that, I used to be like a piano player and this kind of thing as a kid, but I think I started taking it more seriously as a teenager, getting into music production. My space back then and still to this day, to a certain extent, was actually hip hop music. I used to be a bit of a beat maker during my early days, working with a lot of like rappers in France and the sort of the independent music scene out there, making beats as a sound engineer, as a DJ, also for events. And I went to business school when I was 18, which was fine. It was an interesting cursus. But this being said, like my passion was always to work with music. And so I actually got, let's say, very lucky because I managed to find a space, which I still work in to this day, straight out of university, which kind of combined the things that I studied and I enjoyed, which are business management and marketing and strategy, and my, let's say, personal passion, which is music and sound. And so basically, since I left university, I've been able to work in this sort of very exciting space that combines those two worlds. Um, Initially starting off just like interning in the music department of an ad agency, working my way up until I was managing the music department of this ad agency. Most people don't know, but of course, music is an important part of advertising. So a lot of agencies will have departments that specialize in this. After this, I worked for a while as a freelance music supervisor in Paris, where as a freelancer, basically my job was to consult for brands in Paris on how they use and how they create music. So during this time, I was working mostly for brands in the fashion space. Actually, I did work for Hermès, for Chanel, for Breitling, Louis Vuitton. The list kind of goes on. And after doing that for a while, I joined the company I work for now, which is Massive Music. As I mentioned, Massive Music is the leading agency on a global scale for this specific niche that we work in, which is music and sound for brands. Initially, I started working in our Amsterdam office for a couple of years, but we do have a global mandate as Massive Music. We have 10 offices around the world. And actually what happened is while working in the Amsterdam office, I was working a lot with clients in the Middle East, especially here in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, some in Qatar. And I saw that there was a real sort of need for the work that we do here in the region, and an opportunity also for us as a business to come here and support a lot of the big brands that are growing in the region with music and sound. And so I actually took the initiative of coming over here to open our MENA hub, which is based in Dubai now, about a year and a half ago. And for the last year and a half, I've actually been building our business here locally. In that time, we've worked with a lot of the big leading brands here in the UAE, but also across the region. We've worked with Ian, we've worked with Nahil, we've worked with Qatar Airways, we worked with Neom or Saudi Aramco, for example, in Saudi Arabia, and also quite a bit of film and television. I don't know if you have any sort of Saudi people in your audience, or maybe people who just watch Arabic movies on Netflix, but we did all of the music for a movie called Satar, which is a big Saudi movie that came out last year. It was #1 in the box office there. It's basically like a sort of action comedy by a big studio called Telfaz 11 in Saudi Arabia that do a lot of sort of the leading productions out there. So at the moment, the space that we're in is really working with a lot of the big brands and film production companies here in the region to help them sound better, use music more effectively, be more smart, be more creative in the way that they're using music. But at the same time, we are building a business and really building out an industry, because there wasn't necessarily historically a whole lot of expertise and a whole lot of companies that do what we do out here in the region. So we are in many ways kind of leading the charge on building out the industry of brand and film production music out here across the MENA region. I think that's a pretty good summary of the story. I can get talking for a long time about myself, so I'll cut it off here.
No, you're good. I really appreciate the detail. I mean, you're making my job so much easier for me. You've answered like more than half my questions. So I'm just kind of sitting here in awe of like listening to how like crazy exciting your adventure's been. But I mean, you've definitely talked about a lot of major milestones that took you to where you are today, and you've mentioned some gaps in the music industry. Throughout this whole process,
Yeah.
and of course your extensive experience, what do you feel has been the biggest challenge that you've come across, and how do you feel you overcame it?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, on a personal level, settling into whether it's the UAE or the region was actually very easy. I have an international background. A lot of people here do, whether it's foreigners that come here, live here in the region, or a lot of the local population that studies and has worked abroad. So actually, I feel very at home here, and it's been very easy kind of socially and professionally to get settled in. What I will say is kind of a bit more of a challenge is on the professional side, a challenge and kind of an opportunity at the same time, which is, as you mentioned, whether it's our niche of brand and sort of entertainment music, but even the music industry as a whole, I would argue, across the region is still very much in a development phase. There is still a lot to do in terms of providing the right infrastructure for talent, providing the right rules and regulations, the right tools, the right education for getting people to understand music and have really a sustainable industry in this part of the world. Now, what's really exciting is it is an ambition across the region to achieve this, whether it's here in the UAE or in Saudi Arabia with the Music Commission or in other countries across the region. There is a drive that is both coming from the people and the society, but also from the institutions and the governments to grow the cultural space and especially the music space, which I think a lot of people would be willing to admit has been maybe lacking a little bit as a sustainable industry historically in the region. To this day, it's quite difficult to make a living as a composer or as an artist unless you can break into those kind of superstar level talents. As an independent composer or an independent musician, it is quite difficult to make a living. A lot of the composers that we work with, for example, here in the UAE, will have a day job as a data scientist at Google or something, and then they will do their music composition work in the evening because not only is there not yet enough sort of infrastructure to support them and building that out as a career, but also there is a bit of a struggle in terms of understanding the value of music. Getting paid as a musician for your composition work, for your performance work, for the rights to use your creative works. And so this has been our number one challenge to overcome as a business, because of course we are still a business. We're not a charity. And our main objective as a business is to sell music to people that need it and sell expertise in music to people that need it. And when the clients that we work with don't necessarily have the understanding of the time it takes, the talent it takes, the work that it takes to create and obtain the quality music that they want, it becomes very difficult to find that right balance where we can pay our composers and our artists properly, but at the same time do something that's financially interesting and that makes sense for our clients. So this has been a challenge. We do a lot of work in this space around educating for the value of music, getting people to understand the importance of using music properly. What's the difference between making an ad where you have a cheap sort of royalty-free piece of music from the internet or a nice professionally composed piece of music that we do with skilled and experienced composers. And we do a lot of kind of workshops, talks, and everything in this space. What I will say is that it is also a big opportunity because it means that we as a business and all of our peers and partners in the music industry, we work with all of the labels and the events companies and so on, have this opportunity out here in the region to build our own industry in the space of music and sound, and to do it in a different way. I used to work in the music industry in France, in the Netherlands, in various places, and these are 100-year-old industries that we're talking about with systems that are maybe a little bit antiquated in those parts of the world. Whereas here we really started from scratch, so we can look at how do we get things like AI and NFTs involved in music and sound? Can we use, the blockchain to track music? We can talk about these sort of interesting tech solutions. Obviously, there's a whole cultural aspect of things as well, right? What are the local musical traditions from across the region, and how do these fit into sort of the modern world and what audiences want today, the genres that people listen to today? I love working with talent across the region, who have local roots, but bring that culture and that history that they have into new things. We work with people who are doing like Arabic infused hip hop and electronic music and even metal music. It goes kind of all over the place. And this is like really inspiring and really creative and a really interesting opportunity, both on the cultural front and on the business front. So definitely my and our number one challenge as a business, but also something that adds to the thrill of what we're doing. And that's definitely like a big opportunity, because it means that there's a lot to do, a lot to build, and a lot of both freedom and ambition in doing so. So yeah, it's a balance, but I would say that's definitely the highlights in terms of challenges.
It is so interesting to hear the different, like the perspective of being kind of behind the scenes, so to speak, in the music industry, and understanding not only how your role kind of adds value, but also the different things, like the mechanisms that we may not be privy to, and just even understanding like the smallest things, like from um like you just said, like the quality of the work that goes into finding that right sound for your clients. At the same time, we like very, kind of, we're almost spoiled with our social media, for example. Like if we're on Instagram or TikTok and we choose something that goes to play while we're doing our stories, like there is someone behind the scenes doing that, and we do tend to forget that. And you just said yourself, like it
Right.
is very difficult for people to kind of break into the industry unless they're kind of like, the Beyonces or kind of like the Celine Dion's of music. What would you say is your word of advice for people that are kind of aspiring young musicians or trying to get into the industry but are too scared to take the first step?
Yeah. So generally, I mean, there's a couple of sort of key points, but I'll try and keep it focused. I think, at the risk of sounding generic, if you are a music curator, I think the most important thing is to like be yourself and be authentic in the music that you make. Not even talking about the business side of things. Something that is a little bit disappointing sometimes is when we go to open mics or sort of independent concerts across the region, and you see young local talent who are just playing covers of American songs, or who are doing sort of a copy of a Drake song with kind of their own lyrics, and really just sort of copy pasting things which, fair enough, can like inspire them and motivate them from abroad. But what I can say from the behind the scenes of the business is that the people who want to sign talent, the people who want to pay artists for brand partnerships, who want to use your music in film and TV and ads, they're looking for things that are unique. They're not looking for lack of a better term, kind of a watered down version of something that you could go get in LA, and that's probably going to be a bit better. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for young talent here in the region to do something that's unique, that's really for themselves, that's inspired by their culture and their values and their history and their environment. Of course, that can draw from things that come from abroad and sort of the mainstream, let's say. But definitely don't be afraid to like bring your own touch to it, because it will make your music much more interesting, whether that's for sort of business use or even for your audience. It's become increasingly easy to make music these days. I wouldn't go as far as saying anyone can make music, and definitely not everyone can make good music, but it's definitely a lot more accessible than it was 40 years ago. We have a lot of digital and interactive tools that make music much more accessible to everyone. And so to stand out, doing something that's unique is important. And the best way to do something that's unique is to take a risk and kind of be yourself. On the more businessy strategic side of things, I think a lot of people tend to overlook the alternative opportunities that there are to break into the music industry and to promote yourself. Um, it's not just about releasing music, but it's first of all how you release music, doing promotion, social media, doing live shows, working with other artists, doing collaborations. All of this is important. If your music is great, but it doesn't get to anyone's ears, it's not gonna, no one's going to catch on. But also think about like other spaces that you can leverage your skill as a musician to start building your career. So for example, a lot of the people that we work with are very talented producers and composers and beat makers that work either on their own solo projects or for other artists to create music for them. But they will also work to do music for advertising or music for film and TV on the side, because this allows them to do more networking, get into the industry, of course, make some money from their work, which at the end of the day is still important. If you want to build a career in music, you have to be able to dedicate time to your craft. And in our world, time is often also equivalent to having the financial possibility to dedicate that time. And so try to like think outside of the box a little bit in terms of what are other ways that you can use your skill and talent, because especially in this region, I would say that the music industry is quite a small industry. Everyone ends up knowing everyone quite quickly. And there isn't just one way to break into that industry. There's a lot of subcategories and different things going on that you can get involved with. And once you're in, then you can start meeting everyone very quickly. You can start working, doing like bespoke music for advertising, but then you will eventually end up meeting the people who work at Universal Music Group Middle East, let's say, for example. So, the biggest label on the planet. Because at the end of the day, when we have our sort of industry events and help each other out on projects and this kind of thing, people end up connecting very, very quickly. It's not such a huge world or such a difficult world to get into. So those would be my top pieces of advice. I have many more, but I'll keep it to those ones.
Well, thank you so much, Pierre, for sharing your story, for sharing your really important advice. I've learned so much about kind of behind the scenes and how things really go down in the music business. And it's been really informative from kind of an entrepreneurial perspective as well, and just understanding how kind of piecing together your experience throughout your journey. So thank you so much for sharing your story on the show.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I hope I shared some interesting insights.